you can find your overall dimensions for the blanks on the resource sections of the video. I just want to discuss the two woods that we're going to be using today. The wood we're using for the body can be made out of any hardwood. Today I'm going to be using maple, but you can do it out of beech, and if you look at old antique spoke shaves, most of those are made from boxwood. So if you have a blank of those, that would be perfect. There's also one thing I want to talk about the sole. You'll see that the width of the wood is an 1/8 inch thick, and the thickness of the wood is a 1/2 inch. So this is kind of different from what you normally see. And this is because you want the growth rings to be running parallel with the bottom of the sole. And this is because of the wood movement. You want the wood to be moving out away from the sole and not up into the sole, which will affect the depth of cut. And we can go over that as we attach the sole. So now I want to take you to cutting out the pattern. You can also find the patterns on the resource section of the video. So what you want to do is you want to line the pattern with the back of the blank. Take a sharp pencil and get your layout. Also take this time to mark the center line and mark it all around the blank. And this is going to be your reference point later as we attach the blade. We've got the pattern laid onto our blank. Now the next step is to cut it out on the bandsaw. Some of the trickier spots on this is this tight curve right in here. So what I like to do is come in and just run a quick saw curve before I start. And then I will come in from both sides of the curve. So now we have the general profile all cut out. Next step is to attach the blade and we'll chop the throat. We're going to use threaded inserts that you can find the specs on the resource section of the video. But they're 1/2 inch, 832 interior thread, hex drive inserts. Make sure you get hex drive inserts because it's going to be a huge pain to get them into the wood if they're not. So what you're going to do is we're going to match up our center lines with the center line on the body and keep the back of the blade flush with the back of the body. clamp it in place. And I like these Irwin quick grips because, man, they make quick work of this stuff. We're going to take the awl and mark the center of that pilot hole. Now we're going to drill for the insert. I think I use a 1/4 inch bit for this, 1/4 inch brad point drill bit. Line up your center. Make sure you're square in both planes. And take a hex bit to drive it home. And again, make sure you're driving that in nice and square. Also, I like to clean up anything that was left from your drill bit. Screw this blade back into place. And you can find the specs for the screws on the resource section of the video as well. Okay, so once you have one side in, you're going to clamp down the other side and repeat the process. The blade's fully attached, so now we're going to lay out for the throat. We want to mark the front of this cutting edge by taking a sharp pencil. And also, we want to transfer those cutting edge lines because this is going to dictate the cheeks of the throat. So once you have all that information transferred on, remove the blade. And grab your square. And transfer those lines up. Now for the back of the throat, I'm going to lay out this 1/8 inch line. And that's going to come in handy when we're doing the final shaping. But for now, we're going to use it as a reference to transfer the cheeks of the throat up. Okay? So now that we're laid out, we're going to cut some saw curves along the line and chop out the rest of the throat. We're going to start with the edges. And you want to line your saw up nice and even with the line. And just take it slow. Not to go past any of your layout lines. And I like to go from edge to edge. To the middle. And then to either side of the middle. This, of course, is just my style. You can go along in a straight line too. I don't mind. I'll allow it just this once. Okay. Now the next step is to chop it out. You're gonna take, you're gonna wanna grab a 1/2 inch chisel for this. You just wanna grab a hammer, We're just moving quickly along, just getting rid of this waste as fast as possible. Just staying clear of your layout lines. Now I like to clean it up with a 1-inch chisel. Now, just clean up the face of the throat with your 1-inch. I also like to place a backer board underneath because, as you see, I don't exercise the best control at the bottom of my cut. So maybe if you're like Mr. Miyagi with a chisel, you can control it, but I like a backer board. Set this body up in the vise and pair the cheeks of the throat. Okay. Now set it back up. I also like to, at this point, kind of just make a little chamfer along this exposed end grain to prevent any chip out. It's also a nice, a nice little detail that I like to add. And you can also then follow those chamfers, and just looks cool. Also, before the sole is epoxied on, you just want to get into that sole with a card scraper, or into the throat with a card scraper, because after the sole is epoxied on, it's going to be difficult to get to that line. The corners. Okay. So now we're ready to glue the sole on to the body. So we have that layout line from the edge of the blade. So we're going to butt up the edge of the sole to that layout line. And we also want to keep the two ends of the sole in line with the ends of these cutouts. Okay. I like to use 500 epoxy when gluing on the sole, especially when using an exotic wood. You could also use Type On 2 if that's what you have, and that's perfectly fine. But this also sets up really fast, and it's nice when you can work quickly. So just put 2 equal parts. I also like to keep my trash from my sanding belts because I find they're really nice when you mix up epoxy. Just doing my part to keep the world green. Okay. So we're going to spread it on the sole first. Actually, you might want to spread it on the body first. That way you don't have to hold the sole when you're spreading it on, but that is fine. Okay. You're going to place it down. And I like to squish it around to kind of get that lock fit so it doesn't slide too much when you put the clamps on, but just, again, make sure your two reference points are lined up and then you're in line with that throat. Okay. I like to glue on with spring clamps. And it's going to slide a little bit, but once you get both clamps on, you can finesse it. Okay. Oops. And all right. Okay, so once you're all lined up, let it set for about 15 minutes. And then we can go on to shaping the sole. So we've got our sole glued on, and since its thickness the same as the blade, so the blade should be sitting parallel with the sole. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna bevel that sole back, and that's gonna enable us to get us those nice range of light to heavy shavings. We're gonna set our disc sander to that 6-degree bevel we were talking about. So we'll set up our square, 6 degrees, and take it to the belt sander. And we're doing pretty good. Okay, now remember to keep your pressure on the main part, on this flat part where the sole is, because you can tip. So now you can see that cutting edge is sitting just about 64th above the sole. And then that'll give us a nice range of cut, depending on the blade position, to our work. Now I like to set my tools to a relatively lighter cut. This can take a heavy cut and a very light fine cut. And we'll demo that as we do some test cuts in a minute, but the beauty of making your own tools is you can set it to whatever you want it to. If you want this to be a hog tool, you can make it a hog tool and just take that sole down a little bit further and it can take some monster shavings. If you need it to take really fine shavings, just, don't go as far. One of the great things is you have that control. You can make it to whatever you want to be. If you go too far, you can always patch in another piece of wood and do it, This isn't a piece of furniture, it's not going anywhere, it's staying in your shop and it can adapt to anything you want it to do. We've got our Spokeshave all set up, it's taking a sweet cut, and now it's time for what I consider is the most fun part, is we're gonna do the final shaping. So in order to do that, let's take a look at our end goal. Right here, if you kind of look at it, we have a nice dip in the middle, and then it dips out to the edges of the tool. An easier way to see this is if we hold a straight edge onto the top, we'll see those dip down about 1/8 of an inch. And the same goes for the bottom. So this is more like 3/8. And that's because when you hold the tool, you want a place for your hands to go to keep it away from the work. So I like to scribe these lines just kind of freehand by using a pencil gauge. So now, like we saw from the top, we want that to dip down about 1/8 of an inch. You can just scribe that line right there. And we'll do both sides to keep it symmetrical. We also want to mark the front of how we saw that dip down in the middle. And then we can hit that to start. Going from your center out to the corners, just make a nice even curve. Now back to the ends. So I like the handle to be about 3/8 thick. So we're going to come down another 3/8. Scribe that line. Excuse me. On both ends. We're going to transfer these lines up to the front. And trace your lines on the front of the tool. And this is because we still have that flat back to use as a reference when we're working with it on the bandsaw. Now another thing we want to look at is this curve where it comes down. So this curve starts to happen about 1 inch away from the main kind of cutting point of the tool. So now we want to just, let's use these cutouts as a reference, the edges of the sole. We're going to come back right about 1 inch. And what you do on one side, copy right on the other so you don't forget a step or get confused, which I tend to do. Now we're going to take this to the diminishing point right at that sole. And the same goes for the top. We'll mimic that on the other side. Okay, so we've got the layouts for the final shaping laid on. I like to start with the cutouts on the top and then go ahead and do the bottom. This way we have more meat to hold on to. Before we get to the fun part of test cuts, let's take a look back and assess all the work we've done so far. We've cut out the blank on the bandsaw. We've attached the blade. We've chopped the throat so that the chips have a place to go. We've attached the sole, and we've ground on that 6-degree bevel. Now that we have the blade sharp and attached, we can start taking some test cuts and assessing where we're at. So first, let's take a look and see what we did with that 6-degree bevel. So you can kind of run a straight edge and just note that bevel and just look at the relationship it has to the blade. Right now you can see that blade is butt up right to the sole. So what we need to do is take that sole back a little bit and establish some clearance. And I find that cut a little light to me. So the tools we're going to use in this process and kind of establishing the blade clearance is a file and a card scraper. I like to stick to metal tools towards the end of the kind of final stages of this process because sandpaper, you really don't want to mess with grit near a freshly sharpened blade. Just not a good idea. So we'll take a file and establish a flat along the back of that sole closest to the blade. Just so as we file the back of the sole down, this is going to give more blade exposure and therefore engaging a heavier cut. Then I like to take a card scraper and get rid of all of the marks left from the sander and any grit that was left from the sander as well. And just take this part slow. You know, remember to keep that bevel, that 6-degree bevel. And you can just do a quick dry fit of the blade and see, yeah, let's open this throat up. So you can either do it with a file or a card scraper. I like to use a card scraper. And just come at that top corner, near where that cutting edge is, and just clear it open a little bit. You're going to be coming down at about a 45-degree angle down, kind of keeping parallel with the throat, with the face of the throat. And we'll do a dry fit, and yeah. As you can see, it opened that throat way up. I like to do my test cuts on pine because there's really nothing sweeter than pine shavings, and granted, if you're using these on chair seats, you're probably going to be using pine or something similar to it. But if what you're making this for is for hardwood or the wood you would use, test it on the wood you'd use. Make it perform for what you're making this shave for. And yeah. I'm happy about that. So let's take a look at the range of cuts we can get. Let's see the magic behind this 6-degree bevel and what it all means. So as our thumbs are up high and we roll the tool forward, making full contact with the sole onto the work, that's where we're getting our lightest shavings. Okay, and as you can see, we're getting some nice thin shavings. Okay? Now, as we put the pressure of our thumbs down, coming back to that flat that we established right at the back of the sole, this is how we can get our heavy cuts. And you can see much heavier. Than before. It's also easier to see, let's see, kind of working long grain. There we go. So we've got there. So yeah, you can see we've got some lighter shavings and heavy shavings. This is still a little light to me. I like my spoke shaves to really hog waist, and when you're working with these on a chair seat, you're going to be working kind of under the seat and on that front edge, so rounding over, giving your legs a place to go. So I like it to really be able to hog material. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and file down that flat and just lower that sole, getting more blade exposure from the blade. Another use in the chair making process is when you're making spindles. You rough them out with a draw knife, but then when you come and finish them, you usually will work it with a spoke shave. So also, if that's your main purpose, then the kind of the lighter setting will be much more beneficial in that regards. However, when it comes to seats, I think a heavier cut is better, but again, that's my opinion. That's how I want my tools to work. You're going to find other makers who want the complete opposite. And as you making your own tools, you have that control. And so you've kind of gone through all these general steps, and at this point, now you're starting to make them personal. You're starting to use them for what you want to use them for. And yeah, we have a much heavier cut along that cutting edge. And just note that flat along the back of the sole towards the front of the blade. Yeah, this feels much better to me. Okay. So yeah, I can't get much happier than that, and you can also hear when it takes a sweet cut. So I'm going to stop talking for a second. Yeah. Yeah, it really doesn't get much sweeter than that. So now we're ready to shape the body. So now we're getting into this final shaping process. We've just removed a lot of the bulk on the bandsaw, but now the rest is bench work. And I like to work mostly with a file or a rasp. Yeah, I'm primarily going to be working with a file, rasp, and card scraper. So let's take a look at what we want to end up with. So as you can see, these ends, we've got an oval end, and then we have these nice crisp lines coming up, curving around. We have this cutout that we made on the bandsaw across the top. And then as you can see, it rounds over a little bit, just a slight curve. And then the back, we have this line that'll come up and taper up into the meat of that body. and we'll go into every step in more detail. Holding the Spokeshave can get a little dicey at times. If you have a shave horse, this would be an optimum time to use it. You can hold and clamp it down in these awkward shapes. However, I don't have that, so I jigged up these. Essentially, they're V-blocks just with a rounded corner. There's 2 at similar heights, and pretty much just any old curve will do. I just have 2 at the same height, and then 1 at a height that is 3/8 lower than the other 2. And this is to account for this distance from the bottom of the sole to that handle. Okay, so let's clamp this in place. Grab our rasp. Now we're going to fair this top curve. So what we want, if you can see here, is just a nice smooth transition. Very nice and subtle to the end of this little taper. So we're just going to smooth these bumps away, fair them away. To see where you're at. So I'm a little high right here. I'm going to take that down. Remember to maximize efficiency by using the full length of your rasp. I like mine a little bit skewed to the work, and I pull it along. That's looking good to me. So now we're gonna go and hit each surface and fair away, so we make all the curves that we cut out in the bandsaw nice, even, smooth transitions. Checking that curve. Curve's looking real good. Everything's looking flat. Okay. I'm just going to kind of work with this tightest portion of my rasp to come in and fair this cutout. Checking how we're doing. It's a little tricky with curly maple, but if you're using just a hardwood, this might be a nice time for the card scraper. Yep, I'm getting hung up on a little bit of curl right there. There we go. Much as you can. Remember, you only really need to worry about the middle section because it's going to get rounded over. And check our flat. so let's check it out. Let's see kind of points to look for. We want to make sure these curves are all symmetrical. We want to make sure these flats coming out nice. There's no bumps in any of them. So check this curve, feels good. And you use your hand, also feel the work. My eyes are not that great, so 100% of the time, no. 75% of the time, using my hands and feeling. We also want to make sure that these two are about the same measurements out on the sides. Now we can go ahead and start rounding over. And if you're not great at drawing circles, I'm no artist, by all means, but so just draw the best you can. If it's not a perfect oval, don't worry about it. I can shape much better than I can draw. So if you can't draw an oval, by God, you can shape it. So we've got our edges faired. Now what we're going to focus on is the curve and the front of the body. The spot that gives us a comfy spot for our hands to go. So as you can see, we start to round over in this end grain and get good crisp transition lines that taper around that curve that we're going to make on the top of the tool. We're going to taper it down to the center line of that oval. So let's start easy. We're just going to knock this front corner on the top of the tool down. So using our marks as a guide, keep your rasp parallel with that oval. Check to see that you're getting a proper taper line from this corner down. And if you, actually it'd be helpful if we can bring that center line up. So right there is the center of that oval that you're diminishing down to. So use that as a reference, here to here. Details I love when looking at tools are these nice, sharp, crisp lines. So that's something you want to keep in mind when you're shaping the tool. So what I like to stop and look for is, okay, how are my transitions? Are these lines nice and crisp? Are they flowing with one another? Are there bumps, any wavers into them? And keeping that in mind, you can always connect your lines. So right now, what I'm seeing is as I'm rounding this over, I'm starting another line that's going down the center of the tool. And I don't want that. I want this line to come around to the front. So I'm going to pay attention to this curve right here. So I'm going to take my rasp, knock this line down, and make this line as crisp as possible. That's just a detail I like. You can take it and fare away all the lines, no sharp lines, so that when you're holding it, it's all rounded over and comfy and fits your hand. Take these proportions, play with them, play with the lines, see where you can make connections. This is a part where you get to play and experiment. And you can always start over too, or when you're milling that first blank out, you can mill out a second blank, not do any of this work to it, and just shape the body and see what you like, so that after you've done all this work, you know exactly what to do when you get to this point. Okay, I'm starting to feel pretty good about that. Getting a little caught up on the curl, so I'm going to switch to a file. Make these transitions real sharp. So we've got this first curve established, and then we've got that line that I was talking about right along the front. And then as we work this side with the file and card scraper, we can get that line to really pop. We've done the front top. Next we need to do the front bottom. Then when we flip it around, we have the back. We have the back top and the back bottom. So the next step we're going to do is knock down that bottom corner in the front of the tool. So how we're doing this is we've got that reference curve. So we're going to take this corner down, make this a symmetrical curve right here, and ease the sole into the body. Look, we're going to mark that center point up. And that's where we're going to transition down from. And this is a wide, round flat. So we're mostly removing material from this front face right here. Just check that curve. It's looking nice and symmetrical to me. Bring that curve around to the bottom face. Keeping in mind that transition point. You can even and connect the lines in the middle. Scraper. And I need to come in with a file. Got that curve, nice and fair. Got this corner knocked down. Now it's time to focus on the curves on the back of the tool. The next corner we're going to knock off is on the back of the tool, the top corner. So right here, if you look, we've got this line. So we've got the line from the back of the throat, and it dips down just a little bit, coming completely in line with the center line of that oval. And just keeping in line with that center line. And then this curve matches this curve right here, so that is going to be our diminishing point coming up as we start rounding over into the meat of that body. Still a little high for me. Looking good and feeling good to me. So now all that's left to do is to hit the back of the tool, this bottom corner right here. Parallel, about right there. Now we're going to transition into the curve. There we go. Shaping, look from all directions. Take a look at your transition line from the top. Come to the end. Make sure you have a symmetrical oval. Feel the transitions that you're making from previous corners that you've cut. Always switch your perspective. Now come in with your card scraper in a file. And also at this point, while you have them in position, and you're hitting them with a card scraper or your file, curly maple is tricky, so it's always nice to have a good wood file in hand. Clean up your rasp marks. And as you're in position, grab some sandpaper and clean them up too. I like to start with 220. So just get that first grit of sandpaper out the way while you're doing this as well. I haven't mentioned any shaping on the back because that should still be flat from the mill process. When we cut it out, we left this edge straight. We didn't cut it out on the bandsaw, so it doesn't need to be cleaned up. It's perfect the way it is. Just remove any pencil lines that you may have drawn. Now we're going to focus on fairing out this top curve and rounding over the front and the back. So since our middle is that diminishing point, let's go ahead and mark that center. Now keep in mind we have a curve going this way. So we want a curve this way and a curve this way. So it's a little bit of a complex curve. So just keep that shape in mind as you're shaping. Feels good and looks good. So we're going to flip it around. Now we're going to hit the back. So we've got this throat line already cut. We're going to come down and make a little U. If you start digging into the throat, it's no big deal. Clean up. With our card scraper and file. And I'm getting caught up on the curl, so I'm going to switch to the file. Very nice. Just like we did with the fairing process, we're going to work one side and then the other, keeping in mind symmetry, balance, and nice crisp details. So we finished up the opposite side and checked for smooth transitions and crisp lines. Now all that's left to do is go through 320 grit. I like to end at 400 grit sandpaper, and then I'll hit it with True Oil, which is a gun stock finish. I like it because it dries really fast and leaves a very hard finish, but you can use any finish that you're comfortable with or have on hand at the shop.